So we are now officially launching this event. Excellencies, dear colleagues, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to who is with us on WebEx or is now watching the recording of the event. The Geneva Environment Network and the International Union for Conservation of Nature, or IUCN, have the pleasure to welcome you today virtually for an event focusing on the role that nature-based solutions can and do play in creating employment and decent work. This event is organized with the support of NetworkNature and the EU Commission and builds on the outcomes of the recently published report, Decent Work in Nature-Based Solutions. Our session today also follows a series of events that the Geneva Environment Network and IUCN co-organized in 2021 with the aim to facilitate further engagement and discussion among the stakeholders in international Geneva and beyond on nature-based solutions in the lead-up to some critical environmental negotiations. This led, among other key milestones, to the adoption of a resolution at the United Nations Environment Assembly last year, defining the concept of nature-based solutions. Mustafa Kamal Gueye, the director of the International Labour Organization Priority Action Programme on Just Transitions, will moderate the session. Before I hand over to Mr. Gueye, let me remind you that the documents presented, the summary, as well as the video of the event will be made available on the webpage of this event. The link is being shared in the chat. Throughout the event, you can raise your questions by using the Q&A box. We have a dedicated session to answer these after the presentations. Finally, let me also add that the transcription is available at the bottom left of your screen. Have a look at the current slide, which shows where to access automated transcript in 100 languages. With that, Kamal, over to you.
Thank you very much, Diana, Excellencies and distinguished panelists and delegates and colleagues joining us in this session. It's a pleasure to connect this afternoon. We are having an event which is coming at a timely moment in a context of a triple environmental crisis, the triple challenge that we face on climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution, which all present the risks of irreversible damage to the planet, but also to prospects of prosperity, social justice, and the sustainable development goals themselves. So this is an agenda critical to several multilateral environmental agreements, at least 4 of them where nature-based solutions are being contemplated as a way of addressing these challenges, while at the same time opening up opportunities for decent work and income generation for millions of people. So therefore, the importance of considering nature-based solutions is central at this juncture, but also doing that in a way that looks at the decent work agenda. We see opportunities for employment, but it is not any kind of jobs. I think what the nature-based solutions would offer that would be a meaningful contribution to the SDGs would be to generate decent work. So I'm very pleased to have with us this afternoon very distinguished speakers and lead specialists in this area that I would just introduce first before I start with them. We'll have Leander Rees, who is economist at the International Union for Conservation of Nature. I have Michael Lietke Song, Senior Employment Intensive Specialist at the International Labour Organization. Barney Dixon, who is Senior Program Officer, Nature for Climate Branch at the United Nations Environmental Programme. We have Karin Zahn-Berger. Karin, I hope I'm saying it correctly, who is a Policy Officer at the European Commission. And then we have Rachel Susabe, who is the Director of Advocacy and Multilateral Environmental Agreement Monitoring Unit at Rwanda Environment Management Authority. So warm welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and pleasure to have you with us this afternoon. I would like to say that this event is organized by IUCN, the Geneva Environment Network, with the support of the European Commission through the NetworkNature projects. So without further ado, let me please turn to Lander to kick off this session. And over to you. I think you will tell us about this report, the first of its kind, and tell us more about IUCN work and also the issue of employment and the types of jobs in nature-based solutions. So over to you, please.
Hello, everybody. Thanks to the organizers for giving me the opportunity to present some of the work based on the collaboration between ILO, UNEP, and IUCN. So a collaboration that started based, of course, on a discussion related to NBS, where we consider, of course, the fact that on the one hand, NBS does have this opportunity to generate decent work outcomes, whereas on the other hand, decent work outcomes, they can help building support for the implementation of NBS, where then, of course, the question came up of how. Specifically, there is currently no systematic effort to monitor, to quantify and qualify jobs that are generated through investment in NBS. So through this collaboration, what we aim to do now is address this knowledge gap to support governments and other stakeholders to really develop better, more coherent policies and strategies related to NBS, and then with a specific focus on decent work. So before I go into a bit more of the details of the report, I just want to clarify some key concepts. The first one is related to the terminology of work and employment. They're often used interchangeably, but not all work is actually employment. For example, volunteering, work in the household, and work for own consumption, they are work, but they're not considered employment. So when we think about decent work, it's broader. And decent work, what it really aims to do is it aims to provide opportunities for work that is productive and delivers a fair income, security in the workplace and social protection for families, better prospects for personal development and social integration, as well as freedom for people to express their concerns, organize and participate in decisions that affect their lives, and equality and opportunity and treatment for all people. And it really builds on ILO's decent work agenda, which has 4 collective and interdependent pillars. So employment creation, social protection, rights at work, and social dialogue. And this decent work agenda, it then very much links with the just transition concept, which really aims to maximize the social and economic opportunities of environmental actions, including climate action and protecting biodiversity, while at the same time aiming to minimize and carefully manage any challenges related to impacts of these actions on the world of work. So the just transition framework, it aims to support workers, enterprises, and communities that can be negatively affected by shifts away from specific sectors. And it really seeks to ensure that when we implement the transition, no one is left behind. The goal is really decent work for all in an environmentally sustainable society. This really links with the implementation of NBS. There is a strong link between how you can use just transition to promote NBS. We understand NBS as a key building block to achieve societal goals and challenges. And this can really be done by implementing NBS in synergy with just transition, really focusing on how we can support decent work outcomes, resilience while achieving these national targets. As such, the ILO Just Transition Guidelines and the IUCN Global Standard for Nature-Based Solutions share common themes and objectives. For example, both really built on this evidence-based decision-making process. They aim to be inclusive and have meaningful stakeholder engagement. There is a strong emphasis on policy coherence and tools across portfolios, not to really maximize opportunities and mitigate risks, and both really look at how the importance of upholding rights and fostering empowerment. So there's a strong alignment between both concepts. So as part of the collaboration, really building on these different concepts, ILO, UNEP, and IUCN launched in 2022 a first report where we looked at different aspects. The first one, when thinking about work in NBS, is of course the question, what does current work in NBS look like? Where a first challenge is, how can we determine what current activities and employment can be classified as NBS? And because even within an NBS, you may have different activities, a broad range. So in the first report, as a first step, what we try to do is we used what could be understood as NBS proxies. Now we looked at specific activities where people are protecting, conserving, restoring, or sustainably using and management ecosystems. So not understanding that all of these actions are by definition NBS, but in order to understand a little bit this current work, we said, let's start to look at this. So we think, for example, about specific activities within the agricultural sector, infrastructure and construction sector, private enterprises, specifically nature-based enterprises. There is different public employment programs that are related to NBS. There is, of course, for example, also payment for ecosystem service schemes and volunteering for nature-related activities. And so all of these is aspects that we looked at least in order to understand a little bit how current work in NBS can or could look like. When we look at these different aspects, there is a couple of important characteristics that we can see when thinking about current work in NBS. On the one hand, a lot of it is part-time, seasonal, or temporary. This is often deliberate as part of strategies to combat poverty and complement existing livelihoods and or underemployment. I think, for example, about the public work programs. A lot of it is rural because of the focus on the agriculture and forestry sector. It can often be informal, relates to manual labor, and generate a low income. On the other hand, of course, there is also professional, high-skilled labor involved, specifically also focusing on urban work, focusing on design, planning, management, monitoring, the research and the promotion of NBS, where also you have an increasing number of new occupations that are emerging in the labor markets. A lot of this employment is hidden because it's part of other programs and activities. It can also be a typical employment where there is a variety of arrangements, such as, for example, household contracts to manage certain areas. I think, for example, about how a lot of payment for ecosystem service programs work. And then there can also be, for example, social protection linked payments. And of course, to re-emphasize what I mentioned before, volunteering is an important and common aspect across the world when we think about current employment in NBS. Just to highlight just a little bit of this evidence based on two case studies that we presented in the report. The first one is a project implemented in Alameda in Portugal, where the focus was on the restoration of dunes, both through the use of willow sand defenses and planting around 100,000 native dune species to improve effective storm protection. So this project, it generated 104 NBS jobs, 64 of those related to restoration, construction, and maintenance of the ecosystem, where you understand that 12 of these jobs can be considered permanent. In addition, this project also includes now the annual hiring of consultants, for example, biologists, to monitor the implementation. And this project would not have been possible without the involvement of 1,040 volunteers who supported the project to work on restoration, maintenance, and the clearing of non-invasive invasive non-indigenous plants. Then just a second case study, this one looking at a project called Scaling Up Mountain Ecosystem-Based Adaptation in the Central Andes of Peru. So it's a project that focused on improving water, grassland, and livestock management by strengthening local capacities and knowledge, focusing on intercultural dialogue between stakeholders, as well as the strengthening of institutional and community organization, in addition to restoration of ancestral and natural infrastructure. So in this project, 105 people worked on the project, including 89 indigenous people who worked through FINAS, which is a traditional form of communal unpaid work, as well as then additional people working on the project through planning, project management, and stakeholder facilitation. And so just to provide a brief summary of the different types of work involved in NBS, just by looking at current NBS proxies. So now for the second part, I'll leave the floor to Michael, who will present some other aspects that we touched upon in the report.
Thank you very much, Leander, for that. So yeah, let me then continue. I think just what the important part of what I think Leander showed, and we'll talk about it more, is there's a lot of interesting parts, but also issues around current work in NBS, and so a lot of one conclusion is not all of it is clearly decent, and so this then lays a framework for what are the measures to improve also the working conditions in NBS, so that we don't only have more jobs in NBS, but also can have better jobs there. I am not managing to move. Oh, sorry, here we go. Now, one particular important element of the work in the report is also dealing with what we call the measurement challenges. Leander alluded to that already, that it's very hard and there's no established way to say these jobs or this work is NBS and this is not. Neither at the kind of activity level, so neither can we say all this type of construction is NBS or all this type of agriculture is NBS. There's no framework for that as of yet. And this is compounded with the additional challenges of measuring decent work, which is also complicated because there's a lot of parameters to work. It's not only about whether you're employed or not, but whether you have certain rights, what your income levels are, whether you have a right to organize, etc. So these are two levels of complexity that the report also tries to deal with and proposes a really detailed framework that's aligned with the system of environmental accounting, as well as the international standards, ICLS, which is the International Conference of Labor Statisticians, which really provide a framework for measurement in the world of work. So a very detailed framework is proposed. It's also informed by a global survey of stakeholders, but it's not a framework that's been applied or which we can use to come up with current numbers. So what we've done is that in the report, we did the first estimation of its kind based on primarily financial flows and economic modeling in line with other work the ILO does on terms of assessing green jobs. And just to give a flavor of some of the measurement difficulties, I think we also, as part of the report, did a survey around, or some work around the flagships related to the UN decade for ecosystem restoration. So there was a request run through UNEP and FAO for countries to propose flagship programs around restoration. We had an opportunity to survey the people who submitted those proposals, because in the proposals there was a question around jobs created through these programs, and we wanted to understand how people went about both measuring those jobs and estimating them. And I think the result essentially was that it's very diverse ways of people measuring. This is only jobs in itself, not only decency, but some people reported on the number of persons, some people reported on full-time equivalent, some on working days, some on number of positions, some on numbers of what they think are jobs, some of the number of people who benefited, so necessarily in an income sense, but that doesn't necessarily mean they had a job in the process. So this kind of demonstrated a little bit that in this context, that especially in the world where a lot of these environmental programs operate, the way people interpret and measure and report on jobs varies quite substantially. And so we wanted to, and I think this highlighted the need for this kind of more aligned and established measurement framework, which is proposed in the report. So then we also try to answer two other questions. One is how many people are currently working in NBS. So Ariana gave a flavor of what the type of work in NBS looks like in different cases. There are 15 case studies in the report, so there are many other examples. Now, in terms of attempting to estimate how many people work in NBS, we faced quite a few challenges. From the data side, as I mentioned, there's no established framework. So what we did is that we based this on spending on NBS, which was separately already done through UNEP's report on the state of finance of nature. So we took that spending, those spending figures from that report and tried to model that to see how many jobs would be generated through that spending. And I think the one important part is that we think it's likely to be a large underestimation, because both how the spending figures were estimated, but also that not all NBS necessarily shows up in spending figures. Because, for example, if a group of farmers decides to switch farming methods to more NBS-based farming methods, this would not just show up in spending figures from the government or from the private sector. So there are limitations to what we did. But just to give a sense, this is what we came with. These were the results broken down by region, also by age group, share of women, and also we have an additional estimate of volunteers, which was based on limited data from the ILO on volunteers. Some surveys were done on this, and we use these to do some estimates. So that's based on that, it was estimated around 16 million volunteers and 75 million people working. It stands out there that what we call the public employment program and payment for ecosystem services, actually, in many ways, the largest share of jobs are in those areas. I mean, and this is because there are, especially in Asia, very large programs, most notably the Employment Guarantee Scheme in India, where a lot of restoration and conservation activities are done annually, involving literally millions and millions of people every year. So these are included in the estimate. We also tried to see, well, what would the future additional employment be if spending and investment on NBS is increased. And here again, we relied on the UNEP State of Finance report, which makes a projection, or maybe not a projection, but which calls for tripling investment in NBS by 2030 to $40 for 100 billion per annum. And they did that really, and these numbers are really based on increasing investment in 4 key activities: reforestation, silvopasture restoration, peatland restoration, and mangrove restoration. And it's based on those 4 key activities that we then estimated what would, if this work was done, if this these investment is made in these 4 key areas, what would be the employment effect? And we came to around 20 million additional jobs by 2030. And again, we have a distribution of those. Not surprisingly, most of those jobs would be in agriculture and forestry, but there would be jobs in additional sectors as well, taking into account that this looked at right? Not only direct jobs, but the kind of economy-wide employment effects from this increased investment in NBS. Also, this was broken down in not only in regions, but also in kind of in income income categories of the countries, and we had 4. And I think it's interesting that, you know, middle income countries, both upper and middle income countries, the projections are that by far the bulk of employment would be created in those 2 categories, which is interesting. Many factors contribute to that. Perhaps, you know, they have a lot of land to restore. There's a combination of resource and interest available to restore, which is probably missing in the lower income countries. Yet these middle income countries still use relatively high labor methods that are relatively labor intensive, so they generate more employment than what you would see in high income countries, and the opposite than in high income countries, why we think it's lower. As I mentioned, the low income countries not only about resources, but also in many, there may be a difficult political context, especially in fragile areas where the need and potential of NBS may be great, but the mechanisms to implement it at a large scale are often lacking, both institutionally and politically. Now, important part here again is that these needs, these numbers are really driven by mitigation needs, mostly, but not, for example, adaptation needs. So they are not. What is not included in the assessment is what is the, you know, the global need for adaptation. What role could NBS play in these global needs, and if it play that role, how many jobs would that create? That is not yet captured in these numbers or in this report because we didn't have figures available, and this is one of the ambitions perhaps you would like to look at in future reports. So then I'm gonna just pass over to Barney, who will then guide us as what's going to happen from here on with after release of the first report and yeah, coming future reports, etc. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. I'm not going to be presenting any slides, so don't be worried by the absence of slides. Just a first remark, just to note that UNEP is very pleased to be working with ILO and IUCN in this partnership. For our side, we think it's important to be quantifying the full range of benefits that nature-based solutions can deliver. And also, as we think about ways to scale up the use of nature-based solutions, how important it is to align that with the decent work and just transition agenda. So before saying something about where we're going to take this work in the years going forward, I just want to note, I think it is worth noting that even in the relatively short period since the 2022 report, which you've just been hearing about, was finalized, which is approximately in October last year, we've seen several developments which show increased interest in NBS, increased interest in just transition, and indeed increased interest in the connections between them. And I'll just very briefly register a few of those developments over the last few months. We've seen it reflected in the outcomes from UNFCCC COP27, CBD COP15. We've seen it in the launch of the ENACT initiative under the Egyptian presidency of COP27. This initiative now co-chaired by Egypt and Germany. This ENACT initiative aims at enhancing nature-based solutions for accelerated climate transition, and it explicitly links enhancing nature-based solutions to issues of secure and fair employment. Just one example from at the national level, we've seen a roadmap released by the Biden administration in the US in November. That's all about a roadmap for accelerating the use of nature-based solutions. It has 5 strategic areas, One of those strategic areas is focused on the workforce and providing improved training for nature-based solutions to support the creation of good jobs. And finally, I'd note that UNEP has been requested, as mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, to convene intergovernmental consultations on nature-based solutions with a broad aim of increasing a common understanding of nature-based solutions. That those consultation processes has now been scheduled and will be taking place this year. It kicks off with the first meeting in a couple of weeks in mid-May and then concludes in the middle of October this year. So a lot of recent developments, and a number of them already making explicit links between nature-based solutions and work and the quality of their work in nature-based solutions. So where are we taking this this work? Where is this partnership going on this? We envisage this first, the 2022 report is envisaged, or will be indeed be, the first in a series of biennial reports. We'll be producing these reports every 2 years up to 2030. So it aligns with the time frame of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. So the next reports will be released at the end of, towards the end of 2024, and the one after that in end of 2026. What will we be doing in these future subsequent reports? I'm focusing here mainly on the next 2 reports. Looking ahead beyond that, I don't think is worthwhile at this stage. You've already heard about some of the challenges in estimating the volume of work in nature-based solutions. We will continue to be, first point then is that we will continue to be explicit about those challenges and seek ways to address them. But as I say, we'll be clear about the choices we're making. To put it, try to express the challenge in a sort of simple and concise way, we face a dilemma, if you like, that the more detailed our characterization of nature-based solutions is, the more information we will need to determine whether a particular job or a particular type of job counts as, or type of work counts as work in nature-based solutions. On the other hand, the looser and less precise our characterization of nature-based solutions is, the more uncertain we will be that we are actually counting jobs in nature-based solutions. So we're going to have to steer a course between these 2 extremes. And I said we'll be quite clear about that. Second point, in part to mitigate some of these challenges, address some of these uncertainties, we will explore different methodologies for estimating the volume of work in nature-based solutions. Using both direct methods, where we start from labor statistics and estimate what proportion of work in particular categories of work counts as nature-based solutions, to continuing to use the indirect methods which Michael outlined, which are used in the first report, where you start from the volume of finance going into nature-based solutions and then using modeling approaches to estimate the number of jobs or the amount of work that finance will generate. And then we will seek to synthesize, bring together the estimates resulting from these different approaches or methodologies. So this is, as I hope is becoming clear, an inexact science currently. But our approach is roughly that it's better to be approximately correct than precisely wrong in this area. third point about where we're going on this with this report series, we will look particularly at those cases where nature-based solutions are combined with what are variously termed hard, grey, or infrastructural approaches. As I'm sure many of you know, often nature-based solutions can be combined very effectively with these other approaches. And indeed, it may be that in the real world, these, as it were, hybrid approaches are actually more common, more numerous than the instances of, as it were, pure nature-based solutions. Fourthly, and this is the final point and perhaps the most important one where we intend to go on the series, we'll be looking increasingly at policy issues and working on recommendations for how we can both scale up nature-based solutions and do so in a way that enhances the quality of work in nature-based solutions. So these may be recommendations relating to the data and the categories of data that countries are currently collecting on labor, their labor statistics, but also on other issues, including, I think, particularly an early issue we're likely to focus on, has already been touched on, relates to the skills that will be needed in this new nature economy, and what are the training needs that will need to be met in order to enhance that we have the labour force ready to deliver scaled-up nature-based solutions. So that's our current thinking on where we're going on this next report due towards the end of 2024. So I'll conclude my remarks there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Leander, Michael, and Barney for this excellent framing. And I want to say that this is absolutely a pioneering work, which is looking at an agenda that has not been explored so far. And as you've said, Barney, there is some approximation, but this is the best guess that we have. It's not science, but I think we've done the best effort that was possible. I wanted to also mention that there are a number of technical issues in terms of understanding what nature-based solutions are in the absence of a sort of universal definition of it, but the different kinds of work that we have in this space, and where do we differentiate with decent work and aim at achieving a decent work for all, and what the characteristics of those works in NBS are. And from there now, with this first report, where you plan to go together, working in this very critical partnership between UNEP, the ILO, and IUC. And now I just wanted to bring to your attention that as we speak, some questions of comments are coming in the chat. I would like to just throw to you at this point to react to, please. Olga is asking if PCA staff work, especially those park rangers and forest guards, for example, would you count them as NBS work, as green work? And the other question from Mana Faruqi is that there is, Michael, this point that you made on fragile context where resources lack. So Man is asking if there would be examples of where NBS, nature-based solutions, have been combined with social protection or safety net programs. So this would be particularly transformative in contexts such as the Sahel region, but anything that you have would be helpful. And then there's a last point on Mana's question. If there are any ethical debates around doing cash for work or cash for assets rather than just cash. So I just open these to three of you gentlemen to please just react.
Okay, I'm happy to start with some of these points. Thanks, Kamal, for sharing those questions. I don't have trouble seeing them, but I think maybe I can start with the second question, which is, and the third, which are a bit easier. I think this the first one has some interesting, questions around NBS. But yes, there are ample examples of especially low-income countries how NBS is combined with social protection, social transfer type programs around the world. I mean, I mentioned briefly the scheme in India, which is very much focused on the poor, where literally millions of people are working on restoring different types of ecosystems. It's not only that, it's important that that program wasn't framed as an NBS program. It is framed as a rural development program, and there's a recognition that the restoration of nature and ecosystem services is a integral part of kind of rural development in this context. So again, the line where exactly we draw between NBS and non-NBS is always a bit tricky. I mean, Leander also mentioned this payment for ecosystem services programs, which often in many of the countries we see target particularly vulnerable groups, and their work on this is meant to complement their income or provide, or their livelihoods, so that they are working in agriculture but have additional cash income on the side. And then the last question on cash for work and whether cash for assets and the issues around there. Yes, I think this is an ongoing debate in many countries, many contexts. I think there are a lot of factors behind it. I mean, in short, I think we've seen examples where actually the participants and their preferences matter. We've seen contexts where participants or workers actually prefer in-kind contributions and sometimes cash. And this can actually vary in the context. Within the same program, they may change their mind because food prices change, inflation changes, and they may have a very good example of that is in Ethiopia, where surveys have shown that actually, households actually have shifting preferences based on, but the general consensus has been to shift away from in-kind to cash. I think that has been, and the balance is more towards cash, but there are still specific contents where kind payments may also be used. Maybe on the kind of conservation NBS question, I kind of
Leander, perhaps?
Leander, and then
Sure.
maybe...
Without wanting to go into the discussion of whether protected areas or all of them are an NBS, which is another discussion. Of course, we do understand that actions related to protection can often be considered NBS. I think the most relevant question when thinking about park rangers, etc., is of course just looking at it from a decent work perspective, where there is a lot of challenges. And then, of course, when you think about potentially implementing certain protection actions, which can include, for example, employment of park rangers, linking that with the just transition framework. So that's what I would say without wanting to go into the discussion of exactly what type of protected areas are NBS and not.
Thank you, Barney. Any point?
Well, I'm rash enough, unwise enough to step into the question that Leander wasn't. Yes, I mean, this is a question. I don't think we should attach too much importance to it. The basic issue is that nature-based solutions are, in the purpose of nature-based solutions is to address some societal challenge, or as is put in the UN Environment Assembly definition of NBS, address a social, economic, or environmental challenge. And the question is whether whether actions in pure, as it were, conservation, as some protected areas are, and therefore the work of park rangers working in those conservation areas, whether that counts as contributing to a societal challenge. There are different views on that. I would be inclined to take a more sort of encompassing view. So I think they, and many protected areas are indeed actually explicitly designed to address some particular societal challenge, whether it's to do with coastal protection or water management or whatever. So I would be inclined to take a more inclusive view of whether that work counts as work in MBS. But of course, as Leander said, a very important issue is it also relates to the quality of that work, whether those are good jobs that the park rangers have. Over.
Thank you so much. There are a couple of more questions, but I would suggest that we pick them up after we hear from Karine and Rachel. So without further ado, please allow me to turn over to Karine now, joining us from the European Commission. Karine, I think you have a lot to tell us about the NBS in the decade of knowledge and practice, also about the EU Green Deal principle of leaving no one behind. So let me just turn over to you, please.
Thank you, Kamel, and I understand that my couple of background slides will come here. Yes, I think let's go to the next slide. I mean, I'm Karin Zondberger. I work in the international part of DG Environment. I'm involved in CPD and UNFCCC negotiations and also in the intergovernmental consultation on nature-based solutions, just to give a bit of a background on myself. I'd like to start my short intervention, just also remind ourselves that nature-based solutions, which some people say it's a new concept, it might be not so new after all, if we consider all the different names and terms we might have used over the last decades. And I mean, I can roll back inside the European Union. I mean, we talked about green infrastructure, ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction, ecosystem-based adaptation, natural water retention measures. So while all those terms, of course, are not synonyms, they have kind of been crafted and developed in different policy areas, but at the end, what they all share, and that has also come up in the previous, by the presentation of the previous speakers, the underlying rationale of all of these all these terms is we work with nature for people, or we could actually even enlarge it and say we work with nature, with people. As we speak here, we focus on the job creation, decent job creations. So we work with nature, with people, for people and nature. We have nature-based solutions are beneficial for social and economical benefits, but also for natural benefits. It's be beneficial for nature and people and climate. Next slide, please. We have had in the past few years, I mean, a lot of discussion, and it's still ongoing on terms and definitions. And I think it's very fortunate to see that how well science and also then here policy, notably international policy, is aligned. I've put here the multilaterally agreed definition in the UNEA 5.5 solution, and that matches very, very well with the thinking of science. I put here a figure from Seddon et al. That shows how nature-based solutions delivers multiple benefits for people, for nature, and for climate. And while biodiversity, the being beneficial for biodiversity is fundamental to nature-based solutions for the simple fact that in order to have healthy ecosystems, the biodiversity aspects are truly important. So we cannot neglect those. Next slide, please. So I'd like to make a kind of a bit of a description of what has happened in the European Union over the last years. In 2019, we had the adoption of the European Green Deal, which we say it's our holistic roadmap in order to have a just transition. And then, as you can see, there were a number of sections in this European Green Deal, from increasing the EU's climate ambition, supplying clean and affordable and secure energy, mobilizing industry, building and renovating in an energy and resource efficient way, but also preserving and restoring ecosystems and biodiversity, zero pollution, a farm to fork, a fair, healthy and environmental friendly food system. And we wanted to accelerating the shift to sustainable and smart mobility. Now, all these under the heading, leaving no one behind. So this is meant to be a just transition, leaving no one behind. So this, I think, is very well linked to what we are talking here, the idea of providing decent jobs for all. And so behind all this is, of course, transforming the youth economies for sustainable future. So that's something that where we address the planetary emergency of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution, which are interdependent, so that we can address those in an integrated manner. Now, over the past few years, I mean, under these different heading sections of the European Green Deal, you have seen a whole series of strategies, laws, initiatives that have come out through this. I mean, I'd just like to point out a few which are highly relevant in the context of nature-based solutions, notably the EU adaptation strategy, which now really recognizes the great role of healthy ecosystems for adaptation, both in rural and in coastal and in the urban context. There's also the EU renovation wave, which is about the renovation of buildings and the new buildings in the urban context, where it's kind of accepted that, I mean, if we also think about the increased energy efficiency that we can have through green walls and, I mean, green roofs, and if we look at also the way how this can help to, it's linked to the adaptation strategy to tackle the urban heat island effect, which then will also help to further increase energy efficiency, so which will then lead to reduce emissions, so we can really get into a positive spiral. And then, of course, the EU biodiversity strategy and its connected nature restoration law, where the I mean, the idea, the concept of nature-based solutions through their implementation, we really can contribute to solve, I mean, to address really a number of societal and environmental and economic issues is very well embedded. And I also mentioned the European Bauhaus initiative. Now, this is something that comes more from, call it the aesthetic way, meaning that all this can also be beautiful and inspiring. I mean, it's very much also in the context of cities. Now, coming back to how linking all this to jobs, I mean, now all these strategies and initiatives, in order to make them a reality on the ground, I mean, this will need many hands. And I think this is this huge asset of nature-based solution, that it needs many hands. It needs, when you think about it through a job lens, I mean, it needs many hands, many different education, formation. So it doesn't only, we heard before that the study from ILO, UNEP, and IOCN that was presented really focused a bit more on the rural areas, but I think in particular also in the urban spaces, where we really have to transform our cities in order to be climate resilient, to really be able to cope with the increase in climate impacts. And there we will need green infrastructure and nature-based solutions full, and they will also have a really huge population. More and more people are living in cities. So here we can probably, through increasing the number of jobs to implement nature-based solutions, this will actually enable a big part of the population, or all population, city dwellers, to become part of the solution. And that's a very important aspect, because if you look in about what is a very important success factor for nature-based solutions, that you have to have the people who are living in this place, you have to have them on your side. You cannot successfully implement nature-based solutions against the will of the people. So these participatory approaches are a complete key. And I mean, here we can really have, I mean, this is a wonderful asset, because for once we should not speak about the costs. We always have, is it too expensive? But it's an investment in the people. It's an investment in the population. through them, these nature-based solutions will become a reality. And so scaling up this implementation, we will probably have opportunity in order to address our challenges in an integrated manner. Next slide, please. Now, I'd like to just make a quick flash on this platform that has actually been developed by NetworkNature, the project that also helped to organize this event. They developed a platform on a community for nature-based enterprises, trying to help exchange experience and trying to really help that those who really want to be interested in, who want to set up new projects, new enterprises in order to implement nature-based solutions can really flourish and interact with one another. Thank you very much for this short intervention, and I'm looking forward for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karin. This is most insightful. And I think what you've done also is to let us know that this agenda on nature-based solutions is not only connected to the EU Green Deal, but it connects with many other initiatives of the European Commission, Renovation Wave, and other initiatives. And I think what you said about investing in people, working with nature for people, and what Leander was saying at the beginning also, people working with nature, this is all taking us to a human-centered agenda, which we think is indispensable. In the ILO, we like to advocate that the ambition that countries and people have for the environmental transition is about people. It's not just about numbers, but it absolutely comes down to people. So without further ado, Karin, I'll just turn over to Rachel, who is joining us from Rwanda Environment Management Authority. So very pleased to have you with us so that we hear from a country perspective. And I think, Rachel, you tell us about some examples of policies and practices on nature-based solutions. So over to you, please.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. And in Rwanda, we always say people for nature and nature for people. And this has been embedded in our environment and climate change policy. It is embedded in the Rwandan constitution. Thereby, our population has to survive because nature is kind to them, and they have to be kind to them, to the nature in return. So we also believe that nature can only address societal challenges because nature is one of the basic factors of production of even our economic development and our societal well-being. But for the time that we have, I will just touch on a few areas. Since we are developing at a very high rate, we prioritize what we call green spaces, green urban spaces, and green infrastructure in the name of providing nature solutions. And while we are doing this, while building green infrastructure and green everything we do, we try to take care by planting indigenous species within our city because these species are the ones that are highly adaptive to the environment and thereby providing the nature solutions and then capturing the storm. As I talk, just in one night on 2nd May in Western and Northern Rwanda, we lost 127 people because of rain, and which led to a river overflowing. So meaning that our people know that when nature turns against them, it becomes even worse for their survival. So we need more work in restoration activities. Here, still basing on the city, in the city of Kigali, we have tried to restore wetlands where all activities in wetlands have been removed to let wetlands be wetlands and do their role of flood control and water retention. Just because Rwanda is a hilly country, meaning that if we don't restore our wetlands, then we would have problems where we live in our urban areas. We have also introduced a Green Schools initiative so that our students, everybody who goes through school, is involved in the nature-based solutions, nature-based work, and they tend to enjoy even being in such environments. Then in the home itself, we've introduced what we call kitchen gardens, so that when I need vegetables as a woman taking care of my home, I just turn just to my kitchen and pick some vegetables for good nutrition. We would call that a nature-based solution because one, it provides a good nutrition. Two, while I harvest water from my rooftop, we would still use it for the kitchen garden. Those are just simple examples. I'm not looking at the wider scale of nature-based solutions. Then I said Rwanda being hilly, we also have a lot of work in soil erosion control, agroforestry restoration of using terraces, so that we don't lose our farmland to erosion. And these are nature-based solutions. And in this, more than, I will just quote just one project of Green Gichumbi, though there are other projects like Green Amayaga area, where more than 177,000 green jobs have been created and documented. So we feel that we have to rely on nature-based solutions for our survival and for enjoying life and benefiting the Rwandan society as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for outlining what these challenges are in the context of Rwanda, with the land erosion issues that you've mentioned and how that can have devastating impact on human beings. So this is really bringing again to fore the critical importance of ecosystems and maintaining healthy ecosystems, not only for productive uses, but even for the safety of all of us as human beings. So as we speak, Rachel and colleagues, the few questions that are coming, I might just want to start with them and have the panelists to please join the conversation now, and please feel free to react to some of them. But if you allow me, I'll start with one of myself. We in the report with UNEP, ICN, and the ILO, you've worked on the assumption that that we could have. It's an assumption, of course, of $400 billion being invested in nature-based solutions. Now, if we take it from the point that in the climate context, the commitment that parties have reached is of $100 billion being provided annually. And as you know, up until now, that goal has not been reached. So are we really optimistic? And just your sense of how possible will it be that $400 billion would be invested? But just to park that one on my side, we have Sharuga, who is asking your vision about getting to decent work. And what you've explained is that there are many kinds of work in this area of nature-based solutions, and there's an aspiration to get to decent work, and particularly in the context of developing countries where it can be challenging. So how could we get there? John is speaking about their activities on outdoor recreation, which also is adding another element of NBS. So and create sustainable and measurable business models. So any words that you may want to say on that would be welcomed. Then a last question from Raquel is about the initiative on the economics of ecosystem restoration. to what extent this collaboration between the three agencies is connected with that initiative on economics of ecosystem restoration. So can I leave it to the two panelists to just pick up and signal which ones you want to react to?
Leander, I mean, I'm happy to go first and pick the ones. But maybe first to clarify on your first question, Kamal, the 400 billion is the collective global investment in NBS. So it's also funds that the US invest, or the EU invests in the EU on NBS, and the US invests in the US in NBS. So it's not only transfers between countries, it's ODA as well as domestic investment. And so that is, you know, substantial. And the big investors, the EU, China, and the US are already investing hundreds of billions in NBS as it is. So it's tripling it from 130 to 400. So, but yes, the question about flows to developing countries and how that will, that's as important, but a separate question. That's something we may want to look at. Maybe I take the one from Sharuka, and then maybe others can around, you know, the vision to improve these in working NBS, and what is the vision? I mean, you know, there's a complex question, but I think there are it some ways, it's, you know, it's certainly step by step. I mean, one part of the report is to highlight for once these deficits. I think this is the first part. So we spoke around, for example, around rangers, and we speak more with some authority around that, because there's been work done around, for example, the working conditions of rangers and how perilous and bad they are in some countries. And we want to, you know, draw attention to those issues and say, okay, well, if we invest more in NBS, let's be aware not only of the, you know, let's only be driven by creating more jobs, but also be driven by creating better jobs, so that the investment goes hand in hand, and that there is not a, you know, we don't get into a cycle of creating as many NBS jobs as possible without thinking about actually what the quality issues are. But of course, the quality issues are enormously diverse in developing countries where NBS is not unique in terms of decent work deficits. So, you know, many jobs there are bad, and NBS is more a reflection of the kind of social and economic conditions of those countries. And we need to then, you know, it goes so the job improvement also goes hand in hand with improving jobs overall in the country. It's hard to envision just you know, NBS jobs being the best jobs in town and many other jobs in other sectors remaining of push time. But let me also maybe pass on to others who want to react to some of the other questions as well.
I see Karin. Karin, please, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. If I may, I'd like to also come back to the question of Blessing Sharuka about how to improve decent work in NBS. I hope I'm not too simplistic here, but if you look at how the multilaterally agreed definition on NBS, it says that these measures respect social and environmental safeguards, and we have social and environmental safeguards agreed. So if we make sure that wherever, on what scale, in whatever area, nature-based solutions are implemented, I mean, it is inherent that social and environmental safeguards are respected. Otherwise, this must not be counted as a nature-based solutions. And with this, and again, as I also said in my short intervention, I think a key is that always those people who are impacted by the measure in their area must be involved in the decision making in through participatory approach. I think this is absolute key, and by doing this, I think the coming close to this concept of decent job, because it's a decent job, a decent living. I mean, that you can live from your job. I mean, all this is part of this social safeguard in my view. Thank you.
Barney, over to you, please.
Very briefly for me, and forgive me, this is rather kind of sort of simple, not terribly sophisticated response, but I think it is important to recognize that this is it's a process. It is a matter of a transition, and it doesn't happen overnight. If we wish to scale up NBS and at the same time pursue the goal of ensuring good quality of the work in NBS, that doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen overnight in rich developed countries, and it won't happen overnight in less rich developing countries either. But as kind of Michael indicated, we need the kind of issue of the quality of work to be sort of on the agenda from the start, even if, and this will certainly be the case, not all the work that is created in NBS in the short time will satisfy all the criteria of decent work. Maybe, and some of it won't satisfy all the 12 IUCN standards for nature-based solutions either. But if we can progress in that direction of improving the quality of the nature-based solutions, improving the quality of the work of people working to deliver those solutions, then we are on the right track. But let's not let's be realistic and not fool ourselves that this can happen, that from now on, from tomorrow, all new work in NBS can be, satisfy all the decent work criteria, or indeed that all new forms of NBS will satisfy, a list of 12 criteria. I don't think that's realistic, and I think it runs the risk of making the good no, I need to get this right. We don't wish to make the good the enemy of the perfect. We're not going to achieve the perfect straight away, but we can at least get on the road to good results or better results than where we are presently. Over.
Thank you, Barney. I see Rachel wants to intervene, but I want to also put just one more question here, and Rachel may also want to react to that. Given the UNEA resolution on somehow defining NBS and the fact that you've just spoken about IUCN standards, do you see any work going towards globally agreeable standards here? Building on what exists with IUCN and on the grounds of the UNEA resolution. But let me turn over to Rachel first, and you please react to that question as well.
I will not go into the global part of the question. I leave that to somebody from UNEP. But I wanted to say in the national transformation agenda, environment and climate change are regarded as cross-cutting areas. And one of the key issues that have to come out in all sectors of the development are green jobs. We don't mind whether it is infrastructure, whether it is agriculture. You must show how many green jobs you're creating. How I wish these standards being developed by IUCN and the UNEA resolution can guide us on what is NBS so that we also guide the national transformation process. And in the local economic development projects that the government funds, social and environmental safeguards are a must, because we have realized that there must be a linkage. Otherwise, nature will react. And when it reacts, then the humans, the society will be affected in one way or another, which is reflected in the loss of lives, in the damages made, and you can easily calculate it. So the economists know how well to show that, but that's how we do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Barney, did you want to come on this point, or Liam?
I wasn't quite sure if you were asking me to respond specifically on the question about the the IUCA standards and so on. But just to note, I just wanted to briefly note that this was in the UNEA resolution, which contains the definition, also calls for these intergovernmental consultations to build a common understanding, and has 3 specific tasks. And one of those tasks is to address the existing and currently, potential standards, guidelines, and criteria. There are quite a lot of standards, guidelines, and criteria. Some of them cover the whole landscape of nature-based solutions. Others of them focus on particular types of nature-based solutions, like ecosystem-based adaptation, or nature-based solutions for mitigation, or whatever. So I'm certainly not going to try to preempt these intergovernmental consultations, which, as I say, get underway in a couple of weeks, but certainly just to draw to people's attentions that this is one of the topics that those consultations are asked to address, is this issue of the standards and criteria and guidelines that already exist, and how we view them, and whether we want to create a single a set, or whether we can live with a universe of different standards and criteria. Over. Thank you.
Thank you, Barney, for the clarification. In fact, as we speak, saying we have the CEO of ACAMC who wants perhaps to react precisely on this question. So, Gianna, do you want to bring the official who would like to come on this particular point?
We brought Mr. Judge to the panel, so if he wants to unmute himself, he's...
So John, over to you if you want to bring a contribution on this point.
Okay, sure, thank you. Yeah, as they said, I was the CEO up until last year of the Appalachian Mountain Club, America's oldest conservation and outdoor recreation organization. And now I have a company called Next Ecology, but we specifically focus on nature-based solutions and outdoor recreation, the intersection of both those. And the opportunities, of course, are to create a more sustainable business model, but then from a social standpoint, environmental justice standpoint, we're not only amplifying nature and building up resiliency and adaptation, but we're also creating opportunities for health and wellness for populations, whether they be local populations or visitors. And talking with many companies, I talked with 2 Fortune 10 companies yesterday. They're very interested in the intersection of sustainability and experience. And it ties in, as you can imagine, a lot with sustainable tourism. So that's one point, just on the business model. The second is it gives all of us an additional opportunity to look at NBS and to say to folks, different stakeholders, different sponsors, different government entities that will be funding NBS, to show them another lens as to why supporting NBS is important, and also maintaining NBS is important. So as we get more digital in terms of enablement around metrics, we're going to be able to not only better measure NBX impact, but also outdoor recreational impact, including what it is doing to the health and wellness of local populations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John, for coming up and bringing this additional element, which is critically important. So, to panelists, there is one last question I would like to put over to you before we do the round of closure. There is a point about wetlands, natural as well as artificial wetlands. I'm sure this has been addressed in the report, but would you want to say a word on how they contribute to nature-based solutions?
Well, I mean, on this point, because there are a few other questions that link to the kind of this question of the benefits from nature-based solutions that I think is worth responding to. I think many people on the tourism side, the wetland side, there was another question that came in later around, around how do you make the benefits more equitable of nature-based solutions? And I think this is really a critical question, because nature-based solutions generate so many benefits. Some of them, but the way they accrue to a wide range of actors. And so to make the sustainable business model which John spoke about is often quite difficult, because yes, it creates tourism benefits, which can be the basis for a business, but they also create adaptation or biodiversity benefits, which don't generate income, but are a benefit to society. And how do you then, and this is, you know, in some ways the kind of blessing and curse of NBS, that it creates all these additional benefits, but to shift it into a business model where, because the investor will only invest if the benefits accrue to the investor. This is the model we live in. If the benefits accrue to many other stakeholders, the investment case becomes much weaker. So I think cracking that nut, I think, is really, how do we create streams that the climate benefits from NBS find their way back to the people doing NBS, that the biodiversity benefits from NBS find their way back to them, and so make it also more equitable. I think this is perhaps one of the critical kind of questions that I think that as we go ahead, we need to all kind of reflect on and make NBS economically interesting, and of course deliver all the kind of benefits that we want them to deliver. Thanks.
Yes.
Over to you, Kamal.
I wanted to just add an example of one of the wetlands that has undergone rehabilitation in Kigali, Rwanda. The wetland is known as Nyandungu wetland. This one, we did it because of the flood issues that we used to have in the city of Kigali. It has helped control that. We count to it as a carbon sink within the city of Kigali. And we are now getting money because it's a tourism hub, if we may say, in the city of Kigali. Now people pay and they enjoy a green environment within the city, not having gone very far. So that is just a simple example. Check out Nyandungu wetland in Kigali, Nyandungu Eco Park, and you will find all the benefits associated with wetland restoration, just as an example.
Thank you, Rachel, for bringing that point. And there's also this question upcoming about, you know, good examples of NBS applied at scale in dry lands and semi-arid regions. So, for example, to address the slow or rapid onset of climate shocks. So, anyone to react to this last question? And then we go over our final round of closure. Karin, please.
Yes, I may try. And again, I hope my reply is not too simplistic, but when we think about large-scale examples for large-scale nature-based solutions, we can think of large-scale ecosystem restoration efforts. And I think a very good source of information is on the website of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. In some places, the Great Green Wall is actually referred to as a huge example for nature-based solutions. So I think here, there's really quite a lot of evidence, even also if we go back to restoration efforts that have been ongoing over several decades now, and there you can, which show very, very promising results, where actually the ecosystem has been restored, livelihoods come back, water comes back. So where, as I said before, through these measures, in the long run, in the medium run, actually already, you really got into improved livelihoods, better jobs, having a perspective, having also hope. I think it gives a lot of hope because you can really become part of the solution. So in terms of, for inspiring examples, I would go to the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you for referring to the Great Green Wall, because this is absolutely in the context of the Sahel and relevant to the question. So distinguished delegates and Excellencies, colleagues, this is the end, and I would like to just turn over to panelists for 1 minute closure. I think we've discussed a number of issues, from the methodological aspects to the policy questions and normative frameworks and where to go from here. So may I just turn to you over in the order we started the panel, or we actually reverse it and start perhaps with Raquel and Karin, and then we end Michael and Barney. Just a minute or so for your final remarks, please.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for the opportunity, because I have always looked forward to understanding nature-based solutions, and this presentation today made me gain several insights, and I'm so happy that I was part of this. Thank you so much.
Thank you to you. Karin, over to you, please.
Thank you. So my final thought would be that we absolutely must strive for climate resilient development for all, and that includes fairness, inclusiveness, justice, which are crucial ingredients. And also to keep in mind that action within this decade will be decisive. I think we know what needs to be done, and we have the tools, the means, the knowledge. The big question is, will we do what needs to be done in the time that is available? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Leander, please.
So thanks a lot for having the opportunity to present. So I just wanted to end with a couple of notes on future work, which is, of course, we will continue to work on this, in my case specifically from the quantification and qualification aspect. And then, of course, one way in which we can assure an improvement towards decent work is, of course, when designing and investments in NBS, is, of course, consider these as key criteria of your investment analysis when really looking at what the impact is. And then, of course, second to that, of course, is then also making sure that when you monitor implementation of NBS, is that you track impact on employment, impact on different types of work, which then, of course, will in the future increase our knowledge and understanding, and hopefully help us in continuing to implement NBS on a global level.
Absolutely. Thank you. Michael and Barney, please.
Okay, so maybe my final thoughts is I'd like to kind of, is that good jobs and good NBS actually really go hand in hand. As a message I'd like to leave with. And if you look at the NBS standards, for example, if you want to meet all those standards of the project, you need well-skilled people with a variety of skills who are going to do this work and do it well. So I think they go, we need to think of these as hand in hand. The better the jobs, the more skilled people they will be able to enter the jobs, the better NBS we can have. And I think if we can move into such a kind of virtuous circle, I think we could go a lot further. Thanks.
Thank you. Good jobs and good NBS. So, Barney, over to you, please.
Yes. I think the point I'd want to emphasize is that in doing this work on the links between decent work and nature-based solutions and trying to promote both, we need to recognize that it is part of a sort of broader aim. Our overall aim is to be rebalancing our economies at the local, national, and global level so that they are less destructive of nature, less destructive of the environment, and moving towards a world where we are working with nature and not against it. And that, I think, has implications of how we focus on this particular strand of work on promoting decent work in nature-based solutions. Let us not get too caught up in some of the challenges, some of the methodological difficulties, and recognize that this is a work in progress. It's a process which will take time, and we should recognize the larger goals that we are endeavoring to contribute to. Thank you.
Thank you, Barney, for reminding us of the larger goals and the bigger picture of the Sustainable Development Agenda. So with that, I really thank you very much for these very insightful contributions. I think this is has been very helpful for all. So let me also thank the participants, but then turn over to the Geneva Environment Network for the last words to end our session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kamal. Thank you to all the speakers today, members of this panel, and thank you also for all the attendees who joined us for this session. We would like to bring to your attention two upcoming events. The first one is taking place in 1 week from now. We are again back with our friends from IUCN, with the support of the EU Commission and NetworkNature, for an event on innovating and unlocking finance for nature-based solutions, which is taking in person at Palais des Nations and online. The link is being shared in the chat. And also taking this opportunity to bring to your attention another event that we are organizing, dear Kamal, with your friends from the International Labour Organization, which is also launching a new initiative, the ILO Circular Economy World Bank Initiative, on understanding the circular economy, which is taking place on the 9th of May at lunchtime online. So we invite our audience to join us for those two events. And once more, we want to warmly thank you all for your presence today. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this event, all the documents and all the presentations will be made available on the webpage of this event. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.